we had started to surface some new product ideas that we wanted to pursue. And I recall presenting it at a board meeting, and everyone looked at each other. It was sort of like, well, that sounds good, but how do we know that we want to invest $500,000 into doing that? Like, that just, we can't just make a $500,000 decision based on what sounds good. And then we went away and started doing this work, and then it became obvious what we needed to do, and it actually changed what we thought the priorities were going to be.
Hi, I'm Jared Ranieri, a partner at Thrive. That's thrv.com. And this is our Jobs to Be Done case study series. And we're here today with the team from AutoQuotes, one of Thrive's customers who we've done a bunch of work with. I've led a lot of work with that team, helping them use Jobs to Be Done to create growth for their company. And so today we're going to hear directly from the AutoQuotes team about how they use Jobs to Be Done, what it meant for their company, and what the work was that we did with Thrive. And so I want to start just by introducing the team we have here today. So just going across my screen, actually, let's start with Jim Contardi, CEO.
Hello, I'm Jim Contardi. I'm the CEO of AutoQuotes. And just a brief explanation of who AutoQuotes is. We run a platform for the commercial food service equipment space, effectively an industry product information management tool that houses a million SKUs of commercial food service equipment product information, and a configure price quote tool that anyone who is specifying a kitchen or a renovation or updating a commercial food service space can use the tool to make that specification.
Great. And Matt?
All right. Hey, everyone. Matt Kuo. I'm the Chief Product Officer at AutoQuotes.
Terrific. And then Mark?
Hey, Mark Haiti. I'm an operating partner with Luminate Capital. We are a private equity investor that acquired AutoQuotes. I work closely with the management team.
Terrific. And Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Dave Ulrich. I'm an investment partner at Luminate and board member at AutoQuotes.
Terrific. And thank you all so much for being here and taking the time to share your experience with the wider world who's interested in learning about how to use Jobs to Be Done effectively. So my first question for the team is, what led you to adopt Jobs to Be Done? What was happening with your business and the team that you thought Jobs to Be Done might help with?
I could take a start on that one. So AutoQuotes enjoys a pretty good market share among our customers. And so we sort of knew going in that the best way to grow this business was to offer new products to the customers we already have. And being able to justify the development expense of new products, we just needed a framework. We needed something that was data oriented and not just gut feel. And this just seemed like a great way to go.
Yeah, and I'll add to that from an investment perspective, as Jim noted, we got very excited when we acquired the business by the breadth of customer base here, and really the opportunity to develop new products. And I think we had great success implementing Jobs to Be Done at previous portfolio companies, and this seemed to be perfectly suited. So we were very excited to implement it here and use it as an avenue to drive additional growth in the business.
Allocating resources to developing new products is extremely risky because your company is investing money in your product roadmap before you generate revenue and profits. If your actual results from your product roadmap are below your projections, this eventually drains your company of cash, destroys equity value, and ultimately leads to failure. Failed product roadmaps destroy companies. BlackBerry, Britannica, and Kodak all failed in the exact same markets as Apple, Google, and Facebook because they didn't have customer-focused product roadmaps. Jobs to Be Done mitigates your roadmap risk by focusing your team on your customers' unmet needs in their job to be done. This leads to accelerated growth and product team success.
So we had goals of growth and new product development. And Jim, I like the way you put it, really justify with data why you would make certain investments, so that you weren't shooting from the hip and guessing at what customers would want. What did you do in the project to make that happen?
Well, I mean, before the project, you're listening to your salespeople, you're listening to customers, and it all just sort of feels very subjective. And the way we approached this was to break down, what the struggle of the customer was into job steps where we could actually measure how much effort was going into each of these steps and how much were they willing to pay to fix that. And that was based on like actual customer interviews with a big sample size. And I'd never done it before, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, I think one thing Jim hit on is you get a lot of commentary from customers, a lot of inbound requests, and you fall into product management by squeaky wheel. Whichever customer is yelling the loudest or has the biggest need that day. But with the jobs to be done framework, it I think allowed us to hear from many, many more customers through the interview and survey process, as well as have a way to filter that, prioritize it, and start to ingest it into the company's process in a way that aligns their needs with opportunities for the company.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, and I remember we kicked off with a workshop where we had a pretty good portion of the AutoQuotes team from all different departments, marketing, sales, product design, in the room talking about who your customers were, what the jobs were, what the steps were, and what the competitive landscape looked like. Was that the first thing that you did to bring the team into Jobs to be Done thinking, or was there work you did behind the scenes to prepare the team for this new way of working?
Well, we obviously knew we were going to enter into this engagement, and we got the team sort of spec'd up on Clay Christensen's writings and so forth, just to warm up the idea. But the energy really came around that first workshop.
Yeah, yeah. And what was new for the team after that workshop? I think we spent about 6 hours together. So how did that shape the way the team was thinking?
I think we thought about each of the customer segments in sort of a siloed way, and the workshop caused us to realize that they're all interconnected and that they're all parts of getting a particular bigger job done. It really changed our frame of thinking. Ultimately, in our business, there's a food service operator that needs something, and everyone else is there to sort of serve that need. And I don't think we looked at it through that lens before.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I remember when I first heard the term food service operator, I was like, what is that? And, as I learned working with the team, it's people who run restaurants, right? Or institutional food service facilities like a cafeteria at a prison or a university or a hospital. And when you start to think about it, they need a lot of equipment to get food to customers. There's a lot that goes into that process. It's an extremely complex job. Like every job, once we started studying it, I realized how amazingly complex it was. And I think what's really interesting in this market is you have other customers that help them get it done. You've got distributors, consultants, a whole ecosystem that goes into trying to get this extremely complex job done. And I remember that being really interesting on the first day to tease all of that out. So let's talk about results. So we did the workshop, and then we did, as you mentioned, we did interviews with distributors and food service operators, and then we did a survey to get data about the effort that goes into each job step, as well as their willingness to pay to get this job done perfectly. And so was the data the results for your team, or how did you get from, we have this pile of data to now let's achieve goals? And did you achieve those goals?
Well, I'm going to let Matt start with that one.
Yeah, so the data was incredibly helpful, and like Mark and Jim mentioned earlier, if you're just hearing from customers, you're really addressing those that are kind of screaming the loudest. But with the data, that was really it was so helpful to be able to see, what job step that a customer struggles with and actually have, a number behind it and be able to compare that with all of the other jobs that are in that job step. So that was super, super helpful. And then really what that helped us do was to not only understand which job step our customers struggled with the most, but we were also able to look at the job steps across the different types of customers that we have. And we actually found some commonalities between all of those customers that, again, gave us the data to say, we need to focus on this because this actually helps every single one of our customers across the board. So that was extremely helpful from a prioritization perspective and a roadmap perspective. And really in the end, 2020 was an extremely challenging time for our business. Our industry was impacted directly with COVID and the pandemic, and we were able to actually grow our business during a really challenging time. And actually new products contributed to over 30% of the new bookings in 2020. So
wow.
Amazing results being able to use the data that we got from the surveys.
That's really great news. I hadn't actually heard those numbers before, and it's terrific to hear that it had a hard impact on positive growth for the business. And just to unpack a little bit about what you said for the people who aren't Jobs to be Done experts like the AutoQuotes team is now, you've got the job, which is the ultimate goal that your customers are trying to achieve. And then, as Jim was talking about at the beginning, and as Matt just mentioned, you can break that down into job steps, which tells the story about what the customer needs to do to achieve that goal.
The core idea behind Jobs to be Done is that your customers are not buying your product. They are hiring your product to get a job done. This idea goes back to the 1960s when Professor Theodore Levitt summarized jobs theory by observing that customers don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. This idea is true in any market, including yours. For example, in a consumer market, customers don't want navigation apps like Apple or Google Maps. They want to get to destinations on time. This is the customer's goal. It is a stable job to be done that will not change over time. Your customer's job always remains the same. In a business example, salespeople don't want CRM software. They want to acquire new customers. This is a stable job to be done. In a medical example, patients don't want a syringe, which is a product. They want to obtain a blood sample to diagnose their health. This is a job to be done. Customer jobs have a series of steps that a customer needs to take to get the job done successfully. There are 6 types of steps in a customer job to be done that all follow the same pattern. For example, getting to destinations on time follows the job step pattern. In this example, consumers need to estimate the departure time, travel to the destination, and reset the route as needed. These are job steps. Like all customer jobs, this job is complex. These are 12 of the steps in getting to destinations on time. They all follow the job step pattern. Your team can use quantitative surveys to identify where your customers struggle to get their job done using your competitors' products. Helping your customers overcome their struggle is what causes them to purchase your product. When you have identified the most underserved job step in your customer's job, this is how you create a successful product strategy. A successful strategy identifies the target customer, their job to be done, and the job steps where they struggle the most.
In this case, it's an incredibly complex story. A lot of decisions have to be made. A lot of information has to be gathered. A lot of measurement of how they get that job done goes into this. And then they need to make decisions again with all the assessments and measurements they're making. And so what Matt's saying when he understood the struggle about specific job steps is that the team could pick what part of that journey could they help most with customers, right? How could they change the experience of trying to achieve the goal from something that was extremely difficult and complex to something that was very easy and would get the job done for them?
Yeah,
And so,
Jared, I think that piece is really important because it also provided a good foundation for those of us that are not speaking to customers every day. You know, at the board level, we were able to frame like what is customer demand, what is a need, and how do we think about this product opportunity or this request or where we're investing money, right? Like putting it in those steps gave us common language that we were able to talk about a variety of things. And you know, we referred back to it a lot. And I think everything in context of those steps facilitated better discussions at the board level as we thought about strategy.
Yeah, I think to Dave's point, I mean, the methodology and having the tool and the data creates a process for capital allocation that is useful at the board level because the board can understand more intimately the customer perspective and understand the priorities. But it also goes all the way down to the on-the-ground employee who's dealing with customers as they filter what they're hearing, and they can link it back to a more strategic concept. It's not just, oh, I need this feature or function. They're learning to map that into how is that helping get a job done? Is that the best feature or function? So I think it's very effective running all the way down from strategy down to tactics in the organization.
Once your team agrees on a winning product strategy, you can analyze the customer needs in each underserved job step to create breakthrough product ideas that will accelerate your growth. A customer need is an action a customer has to take using a variable required to get a job step done. For example, in the job of getting to destinations on time, the job step of planning the stops has variables including the optimal sequence of stops and the routes to the stops. And customers have to take actions with each of these variables in order to get the job done successfully. Structuring customer needs with actions and variables enables your team to measure the speed and accuracy with which your customers can satisfy their needs using competitive products. For example, determining the optimal sequence of stops in a busy day using Apple or Google Maps is a manual and iterative process for a driver. It is slow because it takes multiple user actions, and because a user would likely have imperfect information, the accuracy of determining the optimal sequence of stops with Apple or Google Maps is low. When your team has identified unmet customer needs and competitor weaknesses, they can generate product ideas that will create customer value. In our example, a solution that syncs with a user's calendar and automatically determines the optimal sequence of stops would be faster and more accurate than either Apple or Google Maps. This is how your team can measure the customer value of feature ideas to put in your product roadmap. Customer value is getting your customer's job done faster and more accurately than your competitors. This is how Jobs to be Done can de-risk your roadmap investment and help your team build a winning product strategy that will accelerate your growth.
Matt, when you think about some of the tactical things that you had to do, because as the head of product, I know I worked pretty closely with you, so I saw you work at a strategic level and a tactical level and go up and down that stack every single day. And I know that you have a ton of experience in product management. And so I'm curious to how did this framing your roadmap in terms of job steps at the board level change how you present roadmaps and construct a roadmap?
Yeah, so I would say prior to the Job to be Done framework, it was a little, you present it in a way, you try to communicate in a way to the board and hopefully they understand it. But with this framework, it really was, we're speaking a common language. And like Dave mentioned and Mark mentioned, we all kind of understand it's simple language. It's broken down into simple steps. And so really when you're formulating that roadmap, you can pull directly from the job steps, the customer effort scores, the willingness to pay to basically make that business case and say, this is something that we should focus on. And there's not a lot of risk with it as well, because it is a high pain point for our customers.
That's great. So there's been a lot of work, it sounds like, in terms of changing the processes of communication between the executive team and the board. Did it change any processes among the operating team, below the executive level?
Big time. Just like with the board, I would say within the company, having that common language and that common foundation and understanding of, what is AutoQuotes here to do? What do our customers need? What do they struggle with? It was really great to start to see within our organization, if a new request was brought up or a customer was screaming at customer success or support, we could take that and say, okay, well, what job step does that actually help with? Or does this map to a job to be done that we're already trying to address? And I think that's one of the reasons, and one of the important reasons why you should involve people from all different parts of the organization. Everyone has their own perspective, but when they have this common language around how to talk about feedback and requests, it just makes that conversation a lot easier.
It's great to walk into a meeting and people who have nothing to do with product management are talking about job steps, struggles, effort scores, willingness to pay. It's like, this is great.
Yeah, Jim, from your point of view, did it give you better visibility into what your teams were working on and why they were doing what they were doing?
Oh, absolutely. If you can take a job to be done and break it into job steps and know that, okay, here's 4 steps that we're really going to focus on and get that right. It's just so clarifying, as opposed to talking about this bigger struggle that you really can't pinpoint. You really don't know if you're going to, solve anything that somebody's willing to pay for. Very clarifying.
Yeah, that's great. Were there any major decisions that became easier to make because you had this framework to use as a team?
I certainly think so. Prior to Matt coming and prior to embracing this, we had started to surface some new product ideas that we wanted to pursue. And, I recall, presenting it at a board meeting, and everyone looked at each other. It was sort of like, well, that sounds good, but, how do we know that we want to invest $500,000 into doing that? Like, that just, we can't just make a $500,000 decision based on what sounds good. And then, we went away and started doing this work, and then it became obvious what we needed to do. And it actually changed what we thought the priorities were going to be. Wow.
That's great. That's terrific to hear. It sounds like it's along the lines of Mark's point about capital allocation. It's a more rigorous way to make those decisions. So did anybody have an aha moment? Was there like one specific moment when you said, "Oh, I get why we're doing this," or did you have confidence all the way through? How did that work for you?
I have to say that going to a workshop with consultants normally is not, a great experience in terms of something tangible coming out of it. And when within like 90 minutes or something, we're starting to break down the jobs between the different constituencies of our customer base, and it's starting to become apparent that, oh my gosh, we've sort of over-rotated with this group, and we've underserved this group, and they're all connected, and like, wow, that was an aha for me.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, for me, the aha moment was when not only was this a helpful communication tool internally with our teams as well as with the board, but when we would talk to customers and use this language, it totally clicked with them. They understood it. There wasn't a lot of ambiguity around it. And then taking that actually one step further, we use a lot of third-party vendors to build and stand up new products for our customers, and using the same language to talk to our vendors as to why we need a specific enhancement was a super powerful tool. They also got it right away, and we were able to accelerate some enhancements from our vendors to help support our goals.
That's great. I'd never actually thought about that use case of not only keeping your own team on track and speaking the right language and the same language, but also your vendors and getting everybody bought into a common goal. That's very interesting, Matt. Matt or Dave, did you have anything to add on this one?
No, I mean, I think the great success we had at prior portfolio companies, it was not an aha that it works, but I'd say the biggest aha was it gave us a way to tangibly see what we were thinking going into the investment. The investment thesis like played out in the data. So that was, I mean, it was a confirmatory aha, but it was a nice one, and it was good to see that, you know, there's tangible information across the customer base that's supporting what we wanted to work on, not just a couple of anecdotes.
Was there anything that Thrive brought to the table around this jobs to be done theory that made you happy with the choice to work with us?
I just think it was the sort of pragmatic, sleeves rolled up approach. It wasn't a theory, you know. It was a framework that you could put into motion right away, and then it was clear that, you know, while you have worked with much larger companies than us, you also understood how to work with a company our size. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, no mystery.
Yeah, and I think working with Thrive across a couple of our portfolio companies has showed me the organization's willingness to kind of come in and meet the organization where they are versus just slamming down an approach and methodology. A lot of times you'll work with an outside advisor and you'll get a rigid methodology. And while you'll have a methodology, I think you take a minute to understand where the company is, what's going to get them the most value the quickest, and tailor that approach to them. And so I've seen that work well in different environments. It worked very well at AutoQuotes, but it's worked at other organizations as well, as far as getting to the value quickly and getting the organization embracing the theories and the thoughts, and then building momentum from there.
Yeah. That's great to hear. I mean, that's something we're super focused on is doing what needs to be done for the situation, not just what is prescribed based on the method or the theory, right? How do we help the specific company work to achieve growth? Well, lastly, this is really for the rest of the world. Is there anything that you learned about using or adopting jobs to be done that you think would be helpful for others? Were there any moments where you were like, man, this is tricky or complex, and you figured out how to make it work for the team and for the organization and for making decisions?
You might differ with me, Matt, but I was a little fearful that we'd get into this and we'd never be able to leave. Like, we'd need a consultant forever to keep running this process. But as it turns out, we were able to adopt it, embrace it, and now be fairly self-sufficient in running the process all the time.
Jim, I agree with you. I actually had that same kind of notion going into it, but you know, Jared, you've been really great at enabling us to own the process and be able to run it going forward.
Yeah, so I think part of that, and again, looking across how different companies have utilized the help, is really the management team embracing it as a process, not as a project. And I have seen some implementations where it's viewed more as a project by a smaller team. And Jim and Matt and the management team at AQ did a great job of just embracing it from that first session we had, and making it part of a process for the company and part of the culture of the company. And one thing I think is interesting to point out is that when I say culture of the company, I think it really enables a more customer-centric culture in the organization. And you know, the team already was very customer-centric, but I think it reinforces top-down an empathy of putting yourself in the place of the customer. To do jobs to be done, you have to understand what your customer is doing, right? What is their job? How do we impact it? How could we impact it? And how much pain is there for them in this process? I mean, in some situations, you come to a surprise and you think, I've got the greatest solution in the world, and it doesn't really scratch an itch for them that's that important, right? But then something else that may be very unsexy or isn't technically cool for us to do relieves a lot of pain for a customer. So the cultural change of really putting yourself in their shoes, understanding their pain points, being able to talk to them around their pain points and their process just makes everyone in the organization a better provider to that customer base.
Yeah, I love that phrase. It's not a project, it's a process. It's part of the culture. I really think that's so important because, as a company, as a consultant, we tend to sell projects, but our goal is to implement a process that, as Matt, you and Jim said, you can carry on without us. About carrying on that process without us, what have you, if you're willing to share, maybe it's a secret recipe, but what are some of the tactical things you've done to make sure that process lives on and becomes part of the culture?
I'll share a couple of things. We've really taken it from a perspective where, very tactically, when someone submits a request to the product team, part of the form that we actually created is to select which job to be done. Does it align with? And
great.
we actually, as we vet the requests as they come in our queue, we also align that and say, okay, it aligns with this job step, or it might not align with any job step. So then that's where we have that discussion with the customer. But you bake it into the very first part of that process, and that just helps you filter out a lot of the noise, a lot of the things that are cool and interesting, but not necessarily aligned with where your roadmap is going.
That's really interesting. So it's a faster way to find out if feature requests are on strategy or not.
Yeah,
Nice.
and honestly, when you have the submitter think about that, it does sometimes give them a little pause before they submit something. Ooh, this actually doesn't align with anything. You know what? I'm going to hold that one for a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, we need just as much justification for saying no as we do for saying yes, right?
Right.
Sometimes saying no is more important. Well, great. This has been terrific. I really appreciate you all taking the time. Are there any final comments or thoughts you have before we say goodbye?
I'll throw out one. I'll just say we talked a lot about common vocabulary and kind of tying strategy down to tactics. I think one area that can easily get overlooked in the process, but I think is critically important, is tying the jobs to be done to the sales and marketing process, and how you think about whether it's content marketing, lead generation, email marketing. The language that you use there should be aligned with the jobs to be done, because that's the lingo you want to connect with the customer. And the value proposition should be linked to the pain points. So it serves up the sales and marketing organization a great platform to go talk to the customer about things they care about and position products for the highest value. So I think that's an area that's critically important as the process matures in an organization.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with that. I remember during the workshop, and we also interviewed some of the AQ sales team as we were doing the research. They were really well connected to the customer needs, and they really understood what the jobs were. And so it made our work easy, because we just had to kind of take that and put it into a language that would work across the organization. And I think that that's something that gets overlooked a lot in some teams' processes, is that the people who talk to your customers every day may know a lot about them. And it's just a matter of like setting up a common language and a framework so that as a product manager, you don't just get feature requests, you get a better understanding of underlying needs that you can then solve with new products that are better ideas. And so I think it's great that you pointed that out, Mark, because it's about selling more, because you're able to more quickly empathize and resonate with your prospects' struggle and show that you're on their side and you're trying to demonstrate a solution that's going to solve a real need for them. And it's also about aligning teams and making sure that everybody knows what they're building, marketing, and selling. So I really appreciate that you brought that up. And that's a great note to wrap up on. I'd like to thank the AutoQuotes and Luminate Capital teams for joining us today to share their experience with Thrive and Jobs to be Done.